I don't think there was anything that we could have done other than a week before leaving and not achieving anything at all. We were always a peaceful protest, and we absolutely proved it to the entire world that we were a peaceful protest. And the way we proved it was because we didn't physically retaliate from the police. And a lot of great people, including yourself, took a lot of physical punishment during those 2 days. And we never retaliated with violence.
Alexa for Rebel News, and the video you are about to see was filmed 2 weeks after the peaceful trucker convoy to Ottawa, protests against lockdown restriction, who was dismantled by the government. Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act, which gave police extraordinary power of search, arrest, and seizure of bank account and property in an attempt to send thousands of Canadian protesters home or to jail. One woman, an organizer, Tom Marazzo, was held for nearly 3 weeks for the minor crime of counseling to commit mischief. Today, you will see an interview with Tom Marazzo, one of the organizers of the convoy targeted by law enforcement for his story. So I want to know a little bit what happened on the last few days of the convoy and how the organizers have handled the situation that was happening not only with the police but as well with the government.
Well, that's a tough question. There's a lot to really unpack there. But we worked with all levels of government in terms of the city itself, like with the different departments. We worked with the police, we worked with the city, we talked to different factions within the truck convoy, and we could see very, very plainly that the federal government was trying to set the conditions for what eventually happened at the end. And on top of that, I was getting signals through the OPP and through the Ottawa police that, hey, you know, your days here in the city are numbered. And so we all knew that we were sort of marching towards the edge of this cliff. And unfortunately, the federal government decided to take everybody over that cliff with them. So, you know, it was a buildup that everybody saw coming. But in my conversations and meetings that I had with the city, what I had with the law enforcement, what I was trying to have with the federal government, but they chose to ignore us, we actually had a strategy to try to avoid all of that from happening, with the exception of we weren't just going to outright leave because we were getting signals from the police that they were going to attack. So there was a lot going on, including we did some media events and stuff like that to try to reach out to the federal government. And I was trying to back channel with the federal government to absolutely no avail at all. And so what, you know, the rest is history, as they say, because the law enforcement did actually attack and, you know, broke up the convoy and destroyed or damaged thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage to trucks needlessly. And there's people in jail currently. And, you know, for what? Because of parking violations. Ultimately, you know, the situation with us in Ottawa was about parking violations. Ultimately, that's what it was. Because if you look at the conditions inside the emergency order, none of that applied to what was happening actually in Ottawa. None of it. But they still chose to use the Emergency Act to physically attack us.
So my other question is, because we saw many organizers have been arrested. So Tamara Lynch said she's still in jail right now. We have Chris Barber. We have Danny Beaufort, but not you. I was just wondering, why so? Or did you heard something about you having a warrant of arrestation against you?
Every day after Chris Barber had been arrested, I would contact the OPP and I would ask them, are there any warrants for my arrest? And they would say, well, let me check. And they'd come back on the phone and say, no, not that we're aware. You're fine. So day after day, while I was still in the city, until I left the city, I inquired with the OPP on a daily basis. And oddly enough, there was not a warrant for my arrest. And I think the reason probably was that in my role, I was constantly working with the liaison teams with law enforcement, and I had been talking to the government, and I hadn't been really doing anything to, other than working with the city and working with the police. So really, I didn't become a person of interest for them in terms of an arrest because I hadn't committed a crime. And I think it's questionable that any of the other people that were arrested committed any kind of a crime. But like Danny Beaufort was arrested, but he was never charged. Chris Barber was arrested, had conditions and abided by the conditions and let go. And he has more proceedings, obviously. And as you know, Tamara is in jail as of today. We expect that she'll be released today if logic prevails in the courtroom. And we think it will. But in my particular case, I think it was because I was able to create a relationship with the police. And the one thing that in my role, I insisted on, and I constantly communicated to the police that I was trying to keep safety lanes open. So if it was a single lane road, I gave instructions to the truckers, stay off those roads. If it was 2 lane, keep 1 lane open. If it was 3 lanes, make sure there was an emergency vehicle down the center so that emergency vehicles always had access. Because for personal reasons, a member of my own close family had been in an ambulance during the time that I was in Ottawa, and so that reinforced the need to make sure that we were acting in a responsible and safe manner. So that was always my communications with the police. So I became less interesting to them in terms of mischief when I was actually trying to work with them and relieve pressure on the city and relieve pressure on the police. So I became kind of less valuable to them in terms of criminal charges. Because if they would have taken me out or arrested me, then who would they have to work with?
And especially, what is your thought and your feeling about some of volunteer individuals or other people who have claimed themselves to be part of the organization and organizer, but have discredited and have heard the movement? What is your thought?
So we've said in public statements many times that this is a very organic grassroots movement. So, the term organizer is a very loose word, right? I prefer, even in my case, to say I'm a volunteer, because that's what I was. I was volunteering and I was filling a role. But an organizer could be anybody. An organizer could be somebody that arranged to have somebody come to Ottawa and speak on the stage. And so they can say, hey, I'm an organizer. Or let's say a trucking company from wherever across Ontario, they say, okay, we're gonna get a group of truckers from our community. We're gonna drive to Ottawa and support the convoy. Well, that person's an organizer. So this has always been a grassroots movement of people that are organizing in their locations and then coming and attaching onto the Freedom Convoy. And so you see a lot of different groups all across Canada that have attached onto the right movement at the right time because they want to support the same thing. Let's get rid of the federal mandates. So you do get some people that you'd like to distance yourself from, but you get some people that you literally want to hug and embrace and say, great, you're part of the team. Mm-hmm. So that happens. Not all the groups were on the same page. Not all the groups were, publicly helping what we were there to do. But everybody had some sort of a role or another. And it wasn't always positive. Sometimes it was negative. As an example is, this issue of the MOU kept coming up. But with the people organizing the MOU, they recognized that it was in conflict with the rest of the convoy. So they did a public statement and said, okay, we're going to put this on hold. This is another time in another place. So some of the organizations and the organizers of those organizations realized that we were out of alignment and pulled back, but not everybody did. Some organizers that have large followings kind of were half in, half out. They had their own agenda, but they were also trying to fit into the overall big picture.
And I would finish on, do you regret, or do you have any regret on what happened or what you have been involved to with the convoy?
That's a good question. It's not really a matter of regret for me. It's a matter of things that I wish I would have done better. And so from that perspective, there are some things that I've, reflected on since I've been home, things I wish I would have done better. But ultimately, I don't think there's very much we could have done differently to stop the police brutality that they brought to Ottawa. I don't think there was anything that we could have done other than a week before leaving and not achieving anything at all. We were always a peaceful protest, and we absolutely proved it to the entire world that we were a peaceful protest. And the way we proved it was because we didn't physically retaliate from the police. And a lot of great people, including yourself, took a lot of physical punishment during those 2 days. And we never retaliated with violence. We proved we were a peaceful protest, and we left. And now, unfortunately, law enforcement feels like now we have to somehow magically be transformed into a criminal enterprise of some kind, because they're trying to cover their tracks on what they did to Canadian citizens who had a charter right to be there and peacefully assemble and peacefully protest.
If you want to help us, as you know, the story of the Freedom Convoy is not finished yet. In the US, they have already their own Freedom Convoy. We have someone on the ground, Jeremy, who are doing some report. And if you want to help us out, you can do it at convoyreports.com. That will help us with our travel expense and to continue to follow the story of the Freedom Convoy. Thank you very much.